Okay, and my second question was, where you say there was no impact shockwave in space. If you had some kind of high explosive strapped to the asteroid, or possibly a satellite that kind of dug into the asteroid and implanted that, wouldn't the shockwave carry through the asteroid in that sense?
It sure would, but any of you who are taking physics courses know that what we're really trying to change here is momentum. And we've got to take the energy of this explosion and translate it into a momentum change. And the way you do that is with Newton's third law. If you want the asteroid to go this way, you have to take a piece of it and push it that way. And so it's not just a shock wave. If the shock wave then produces a crater and material is excavated from the asteroid that goes in one direction, the asteroid will go in the other. And so when you talk about using nuclear explosives, that's what some people think we should do, is explode one right at the surface and basically make a big crater. Okay. But then you can say it won't break it apart. We don't know much about how to do that. And much more attractive in many ways are non-nuclear responses, where we do understand a little better what's happening.
Thank you.
As luck would have it, I've been reading a book called After the Dinosaurs, which covers the age of mammals. And the author is not exactly supportive of the giant impact theory per se. He agrees with the KT boundary, but he said there are other iridium layers and there are other craters that have happened since the demise of the dinosaur. In fact, one I think was around 37 million years ago and made a 100-kilometer crater.
The Chesapeake Bay crater, probably. Yeah, there certainly have been other impacts since, but none of them is nearly as big as the KT one. The KT crater is 200 kilometers across, and that means it's about 10 times more energy than a 100-kilometer crater. So I guess there probably is some real threshold for catastrophe, where a small one could certainly wipe out even a continent, but it doesn't produce a global effect. And you've got some threshold there that the KT clearly crossed. I worry more about the earlier mass extinctions. I showed you that plot that had 5 big ones. And what is very troubling is that we have not been able to answer yes or no whether any of the others was due to an impact. I really am disappointed. I thought 15 years ago when the KT had worked out and here we understood the celestial cause of this catastrophe, that might be true for the whole history of Earth. And it still might be, but the evidence just isn't there.
Dr. Morrison, thank you for being here tonight. A quick question, since we haven't sent nuclear warheads to asteroids except in the movies, have we done supercomputer simulations of what would result in space if we hit one?
Well, I don't know much about nuclear explosives. I would guess some people have done calculations. But there depends on whether you want to make a crater or you want to heat the surface and then have the surface vaporize. Some way you have to get a reaction force onto it. Or you just have to hit it with such a big bomb relative to the size of the object that you break it apart. As I say, this may end up being even the approach of choice. But for small asteroids, you don't even need a nuclear bomb. All you have to do is hit it with a spacecraft. Just plow a 5-ton spacecraft into it at 10 kilometers a second, and you can significantly change its orbit. So you have to look at each individual case. The big question, which I hope I emphasize and I'll say again, is how much effort should we make now to start developing those technologies? Or should we just say, no, let's wait until we find an object with our name on it?
Thank you.
Could you say how much your budget compares with the budget for SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence?
They're the same order of magnitude. We get $4 million a year from NASA, plus a little in-kind help from the U.S. Air Force to do this survey. And I guess, that would pay for what, 20 minutes of Iraq? let's say that neither searching for dangerous asteroids nor SETI is exactly accepted in the mainstream of astronomy. They work a little differently. But fortunately, both of them have substantial public interest and support.
I was wondering if there could be one like tomorrow, if one that nobody found. Is that possible?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
I was wondering if there could be an impact tomorrow from an unknown asteroid.
We could certainly have an impact before you leave this room. We would have no warning. There's nobody out there looking. And none of these surveys even wants to try to detect an object at the last minute. Because we couldn't do anything about it. If we're going to predict, let's predict them decades in advance and do something. So when you go outside the door, look up.
Dr. Morrison, in your opinion, did the Shoemaker-9-Levy comet collision with Jupiter bring an end to the argument that evolution on this planet only occurred slowly over time with no catastrophic events?
Shoemaker-Levy 9 comet, which crashed into Jupiter in 1994, certainly helped. And by the way, you may note that both the movies Deep Impact and Armageddon and the official start of the Space Guard survey in 1998 both followed just a couple years after that publicly viewed impact on Jupiter. But you're never going to convince everybody. I will say that impact, Shoemaker-Levy 9 impact into Jupiter, was wonderful. It was those of us who'd been studying impacts never dreamed we'd get to see it happen. And we were so glad it happened to a different planet from ours.
Hi. I was just wondering, what do you think the cause of the Permian extinction is, and what evidence is there?
I wish I knew. If you know what caused the Permian Triassic, let me know, because that was the biggest mass extinction. That was the thing that came closest to the edge of really wiping out much of life on Earth. And there is some evidence for an impact. There's not much iridium, but there are other trace elements like interstellar helium that could have been come in on an impactor. There's no crater, but then the Earth reworks itself so much that if it landed in the ocean, you wouldn't expect to find any crater 250 million years later. And it is a big problem and a very active area of research. I don't know what happened.
Thanks.
Part of me would like to think it was an impact, but that's prejudice more than based on fact.